In Middle-earth, some of the most terrifying creatures are the Balrogs and the dragons, demons of shadow and flame, massive winged serpents that can destroy entire kingdoms. But where did these monsters come from? How were they created? And why are they so loyal to evil? Hello everyone, welcome to Middle-earth. Today we will try to understand together the dark origins of two of Morgoth's most devastating weapons, the Balrogs and the dragons. Let's start with the Balrogs. The Balrogs were not always demons of fire and shadow. They began as Maiar, the same type of being as Gandalf, Saruman, and Sauron. Maiar are divine spirits, lesser than the Valar, but still incredibly powerful. When the world was being created, many Maiar entered it to help shape and guide it. Most of them served the Valar faithfully, but some were corrupted by Melkor, who would later be called Morgoth. So how did Maiar become Balrogs? The answer lies in Morgoth's power of corruption. Morgoth couldn't create life the way Eru Ilúvatar could. Only Eru, the one god, could truly create living beings with independent souls. But Morgoth could corrupt and twist what already existed. He took Maiar, who were drawn to power, to fire, to domination, and he seduced them to his service. These Maiar were probably spirits of fire originally, servants of Aule perhaps, who had affinity for heat and forge work. Morgoth offered them greater power, freedom from the Valar's restrictions, and the chance to dominate rather than serve. Once these Maiar joined Morgoth, he twisted them. He poured his own malice and darkness into them, reshaping them into weapons of terror. Their original forms were destroyed or hidden, and they took on new shapes. Creatures of shadow, wreathed in flame, wielding whips of fire, and carrying weapons that could shatter stone. They became the Balrogs, Morgoth's most feared servants. The transformation was likely gradual. As they committed more evil acts, as they embraced Morgoth's corruption more fully, they became less like the divine spirits they once were, and more like demons. How many Balrogs were there? This is debated. Tolkien's writings suggest different numbers at different times. Early writings mention large numbers, but later Tolkien indicated there were relatively few, perhaps only 7 or at most a few dozen. What we know for certain is that Balrogs were rare and powerful. They were Morgoth's elite forces, his generals and champions. In the First Age, Balrogs led Morgoth's armies, commanded his fortresses, and fought in the greatest battles. Gothmog, the Lord of Balrogs, was Morgoth's chief captain and killed several elven lords in single combat. When Morgoth was finally defeated at the end of the First Age, most of the Balrogs were destroyed in the War of Wrath, but some escaped and hid in the deep places of the world. The Balrog in Moria, Durin's Bane, was one of these survivors. It fled into the roots of the mountains and slept there for thousands of years until the dwarves woke it. This shows that Balrogs, while powerful, could be killed. They were not immortal in the way Sauron was. When their physical forms were destroyed, they were gone. Now let's talk about the dragons. Dragons have a completely different origin than Balrogs. Dragons were not corrupted Maiar. They were bred by Morgoth, created through dark experimentation and sorcery. But how exactly did Morgoth make them? Again, Morgoth couldn't create life from nothing, so he must have taken existing creatures and twisted them into dragons. What creatures? We don't know for certain. Some scholars think Morgoth used great serpents or lizards as a base. Others think he may have used some form of primordial creature from the world's early days. Whatever the starting material, Morgoth used his power to warp and grow them, to make them massive, to give them intelligence and malice. The first dragon was Glaurung, called the Father of Dragons. Glaurung appeared in the First Age and was a devastating weapon. He couldn't fly, he was a wingless dragon, but he had terrible fire, impenetrable armor, and powerful magic. Glaurung could cast spells with his eyes and voice, dominating minds and implanting false memories. He destroyed the elven kingdom of Nargothrond almost single-handedly. Glaurung was Morgoth's prototype, his first successful dragon. After creating Glaurung, Morgoth refined his methods and created more dragons, each more terrible than the last. The greatest of all dragons was Ankalagan the Black. Ankalagan was a winged dragon, part of a new breed that Morgoth created for the War of Wrath. Ankalagan was so massive that when he fell from the sky, his body destroyed mountains. He and his dragon host nearly won the War of Wrath for Morgoth, driving back the armies of the Valar until Arendil fought Ankalagan in an aerial battle and killed him. After Morgoth's defeat, most dragons were killed, but some survived and fled to the far north. Later dragons, like Smaug, were descendants of Morgoth's original creations. They were bred naturally, dragon to dragon, but they still carried Morgoth's corruption in their blood. This is why, even thousands of years after Morgoth's defeat, dragons were still evil, still greedy, still destructive. The corruption was permanent and hereditary. Both Balrogs and dragons share certain characteristics. Both are nearly invincible to ordinary weapons. Both inspire overwhelming fear. Both are associated with fire and destruction. And both serve as symbols of Morgoth's power to corrupt and destroy. But they represent different aspects of evil. Balrogs represent fallen greatness, the corruption of the divine. Dragons represent evil by design, monsters created specifically to cause suffering. There's also the question of intelligence. Balrogs are highly intelligent, capable of strategy and leadership. Gothmog commanded armies and fortresses. The Balrog of Moria waited patiently for thousands of years, then strategically took over the dwarf kingdom. Dragons are also intelligent, but in a different way. They can speak, they can reason, they understand tactics. Glaurung was cunning enough to manipulate Durin with words. Smaug could engage in riddle contests with Bilbo. But their intelligence is more animalistic, driven by greed and pride rather than true strategic thinking. Why did Morgoth create these creatures? Because he needed weapons that could match the power of elves and men. Ordinary orcs weren't enough. Elven warriors, especially the Noldor who had seen the light of Valinor, were too powerful. Morgoth needed shock troops, creatures that could break even the strongest armies. Balrogs filled this role perfectly. A single Balrog could hold a fortress or break a battle line. Dragons were even more devastating. They were weapons of mass destruction, capable of burning entire cities. The creation of Balrogs and dragons shows Morgoth's fundamental nature. He was a corrupter and a destroyer. He couldn't create true life, so he corrupted it. He couldn't match the beauty of Aru's creation, so he twisted it into horror. Every Balrog was a Maiar who should have been serving good, but was instead enslaved to evil. Every dragon was a mockery of the noble creatures Eru intended. Morgoth's creativity was entirely destructive. After Morgoth's defeat, his creations persisted. The last Balrog died when Gandalf killed it in the Third Age. The last great dragon died when Bard killed Smaug. But the legacy of these creatures haunted Middle-earth for thousands of years. They were proof that evil, once introduced into the world, is very hard to eradicate completely. That's all for today. If you liked the video, please don't neglect your comments. I read all of them, you can be sure. You can like. You can share with your friends. See you. Take care of yourselves.